On the 25th of June 2020, a woman from Madison, Wisconsin posted the following to Facebook. My daughter was the victim of a hate crime last night. As AB was waiting at a traffic light while driving through Madison, a group of white men shouted the N-word at her and tried to light her on fire by tossing in a lit lighter. She has second and third degree burns on her face. She received excellent care at the UWER and now faces painful sessions of removing skin as it heals to prevent scarring and infection. She has to miss classes today, and maybe more. She is sad. She is scared. This is personal. This is political. #Black Lives Matter. This was accompanied by 2 photos of the girl's injuries. I've removed the daughter's name from the post and I'll refer to her by her initials, AB, going forward. The post went viral and the story was reported by local and national news. It was a month after the death of George Floyd, and protests ranging from peaceful to largely peaceful were erupting across the US, and stories of white violence against black Americans were in the public consciousness worldwide. The reports of AB's attack included additional details and more photos of the injuries. AB was 18 at the time. She was training to be an emergency medical technician and she was biracial. Some reports said that she was black Hispanic and one source said that she was black Jewish. AB says she was driving through the downtown area after midnight with her window down and stopped at a red light at an intersection with State Street. She heard someone shouting the N-word and saw 2 young white men approaching the car. They were wearing masks, which wasn't uncommon at the time due to concerns about the viral spread. 2 of them were wearing black and 2 of them wore Hawaiian shirts and jeans. AB described them as Wisconsin frat boys. One of them sprayed a flammable liquid at her, then threw a lighter into the car, igniting her neck and face and burning her skin. She drove through the red light to get away from the attackers and patting out the flames as she went. Though all the news reports appeared to take AB's description of events at face value, a few skeptics in the comments sections were quick to point out a few inconsistencies with her story. Firstly, the burn pattern on her face didn't look like a pattern that a liquid spray would leave. Also, most lighters do not stay lit after you release the ignition lever. There are some lighters that do this that are pretty expensive, like Zippo lighters, but that then raises questions as to why this criminal was willing to just leave a very expensive lighter in the car of someone he was attacking. The reports didn't include any mention of the lighter being found or any other physical evidence of the attack. They didn't show any CCTV footage of the attack or any description of the attackers or a composite drawing or anything like that. And I saw one person pointing out that AB was fairly light-skinned and the attack happened in the middle of the night, so how would the attackers have known that she was black and why did they choose her as a target? A few theories were shared by these skeptics. Some thought that AB might have burnt herself while trying some kind of TikTok challenge or just generally being irresponsible, or that she might have been involved in the protests that were going on in downtown Madison that night, which involved some largely peaceful arson, and there were photos shared online of the protesters setting fires in the region that AB was in where she reported the attack happening. So she might have made up the story to cover up her own crimes or misdeeds, or simply to get attention, or for GoFundMe donations. Shortly after her attack was reported, a GoFundMe page was set up in her name, but it's not clear if she set it up for herself or if it was a hacker, which is something she told police about after the attack. Either way, the GoFundMe page raised over $9,000 in donations eventually. Jussie Smollett's hate hoax from the year before was at the forefront of some people's minds.
And then I look down and I see that there's a rope around my neck.
Something that AB and Smollett's story shared is the cartoonishly evil racist white men committing a random unprovoked attack on victims they had never met. But the initial reactions to both stories were largely sympathetic and outraged on behalf of the apparent victims. The vast majority of comments that I scrolled through when doing research for this video were sympathetic and outraged. A few months later, once everyone had forgotten about this case and moved on to the next thing, the Madison Police Department quietly closed the case. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Madison said in a statement, After reviewing all available evidence, authorities could not establish that the attack, as alleged by the complainant, had occurred. Accordingly, the federal investigation into this incident has been closed based on the lack of evidence. The case report, published online, is 100 pages long and contains a lot of information, not much of which supports AB's story. Her car journey through the downtown area was caught on CCTV at multiple points, including the junction where she says the attack took place. It shows her driving her car in the right-hand lane, which means that she was not next to the pavement, as she said, but she was sort of in the middle of the road, and that her windows were up the entire time. No one approached the car, and if they had, they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do anything to her because the light was green, almost all the way along that road that she says the attack took place on, and so she had no reason to stop and was just driving with her windows up in the middle of the road all the way down that road. The report found that there was only one red light in the whole downtown area that she stopped at, and the entire time she was stopped she was captured on CCTV and no attack took place. Her window never came down. The officer who was reviewing the footage described the coverage as almost uninterrupted in the case report. What's more, there was no one matching the description that she gave of the attackers anywhere in the area at any time. The officer also said, almost sarcastically from how I can tell, that there was no flames to be seen in the car at any point during any of the surveillance footage. The report confirms that there was no lighter found in the car or any other mode of ignition like a match or anything. And there was no damage to the car's interior or exterior at all, no flame damage at all. This on its own is enough for me to feel comfortable saying that AB was not attacked at the time and place that she described. And given the other inconsistencies with the way she says she was attacked, I think we can conclude that she was probably lying about the perpetrators too. I could just end the video there with that conclusion and chalk this up to another hate hoax, but something about the case report kind of dragged me in, and I suppose I've seen too many episodes of Columbo because this started just to bother me.
You know, I was up half the night. I couldn't sleep. I kept going over in my mind. I couldn't figure it out.
How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned?
I don't know!
This girl's face was burned or otherwise injured somehow on that night. And even though I think she was lying, I don't think it's likely that a pretty young teenage girl would intentionally scar the skin of her face just for attention or just for whatever reason. So something happened to her. And the case report being so long and detailed, I thought the answer must be in there if I just kept reading it. If I just combed through all of the evidence that was reported, I felt like I could find out what had actually happened. How did she get burned? And why did she lie about it? And when did she come up with this lie? The case report is thorough, but it's very narrow in its scope of view because no one has brought charges against AB, against this girl. They were only investigating her report of the attack. Any clues in the report which might point to what really happened were only found accidentally in the course of the investigation. They weren't trying to find out what had actually happened. They just wanted to find evidence to support the case that AB had brought to them. What the report does reveal is a rich portrait of AB's movements on that night and the strange family circumstances surrounding the journey she was taking through downtown Madison when she was apparently being attacked. In addition to all the surveillance images I've already mentioned, the report also contains all of the text messages that were sent and received from AB's phone within a few hours of the alleged attack, as well as the GPS location that was recorded by Snapchat, and every step that she took was recorded by a step-counting health app pedometer thing. I guess that's what happens when you download apps onto your phone and then accept all of the data being collected or whatever, is that you end up with a bunch of this information that's just accessible to police if they ask for your phone records. And of course the case report also includes interviews with each of AB's family members, her friends, the hospital staff who treated her, and there's also a suspect interview in there. And there's also descriptions of all the forensic evidence, how it was collected and procedures for doing it. There's a lot of interesting things in there. and more than I can even summarize. But I've tried to pick out what I think is the most pertinent information to what actually happened. To start with, I just want to look at the hard data that was collected, ignoring anything that could be unreliable, like witnesses or interviews. So I've compiled a timeline of everything that we know with some certainty that happened to AB on the night of the 24th of June. I'm not qualified to say how precise or accurate any of this information is. The GPS location, I expect, has its own uncertainty in regards to the time and also the location. So it's got within a few meters, or it could be within a few dozens of meters. I don't know. I don't know if these sort of timestamps could be accurate within a few seconds or a few minutes. I'm just telling you what is in the report that I've read. And just to make note, I've called this the night of the 24th, but actually the timeline starts after midnight. So that makes it technically the morning, the small hours of the morning, the 25th of June. But I think for most people that's still the night time, the night before, if that makes sense. So on the 25th of June, starting at 1:45, AB leaves the residence of NL, who was a young man she'd met a few weeks ago on a dating app. They'd had 3 dates over the last 10 days, which I don't think technically makes someone your boyfriend, but I'm going to call him her boyfriend for the rest of this video just because that keeps it straight in my mind, and I'm hoping in your mind too, about who this guy is. She gets into her car to go to her brother's residence, which isn't actually where her brother lives, it's just where he was that night. Her brother was staying with his girlfriend, or it could have just been a female platonic friend, but again, I'm just going to call it the brother's girlfriend. On the way from her boyfriend's residence to her brother's residence, she sends him a text about kayaking. And I only mention this because this text message was sent after AB had already passed through the junction where she says the attack happened, which is not exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd just been the victim of a violent crime. That doesn't mean that this is conclusive proof of anything, it's just noteworthy. At 12:56, AB arrives at her brother's residence, and she later says that this brief visit was to exchange cards with him outside, which is what the other members of her family have also confirmed. I'm going to get back to this later. At 12:57, that's 1 minute later, she leaves her brother's residence to go home. At 1 a.m, she reads some text messages from her mother and replies saying, "Phi long in," and then "night, love you." I don't know what "phi long in" means, and I'd love to hear any explanations that you might have. But I think it's possible that she sent this text without even looking at her screen, and that "phi long in" is a triple typo where she was trying to write "night, love you." If you ever used swipe texting, you'll know that this isn't as unlikely as it might otherwise sound. It's definitely possible to get all 3 words in a row wrong if you're using swipe texting. I don't know if she was or not, that's just one theory. It's possible "phi long in," it could be an inside joke, it could mean something. I really have no idea. It maybe means something in a different language. 1 minute later, at 1:01, AB calls her friend, MP. At 1:01 a.m, she calls her friend, whose initials are MP, for 7 minutes while she's driving home. This friend had known AB for about a year and a half, 18 months, and she was also an emergency medical services trainee. Maybe they were trainees together, I don't know. They had plans to meet earlier that day, which AB had cancelled due to the death of a pet. This is all according to MP's interview that was in the case report. MP was apparently accustomed to receiving late-night calls from AB. She says that AB recounted the burn attack during this call and gave her the same details of the story that she later told to her mother, to her boyfriend, and then to the press, to the news. If MP is telling the truth, this means that this phone call was the first time that AB told someone the frat boy lighter fluid story. MP said in her police interview that she could see AB's injuries while she was driving, while she was calling her, but that it was dark so she couldn't see it too well. While AB is in this call with her friend, she misses 3 calls and 9 texts from her mother, who apparently was concerned about the car exchange that was going on with her brother. I find this a little bit confusing that the mother would call AB 3 times and text her 9 times, asking her if she's okay. If AB had just sent her this good night text, maybe this was more passive-aggressive or something. I don't know what would tip her off that something was wrong. This behaviour does almost suggest that the mother somehow knew about the attack taking place and was worried about her for that reason. But if she knew about the attack, it's not because AB told her, as far as we can tell from the phone records, because AB didn't text her or call her to tell her about the attack. So how would she have known? Anyway, at 1:08 a.m, AB calls her mother after hanging up on her friend, and they talk for 15 minutes while she's still driving home. AB finally arrives home at 1:24, which is when she texts her boyfriend on Snapchat to tell him about the attack. She tells him the same frat boy lighter fluid story, but in this report she says the liquid was beer. Remember that the first 2 times she's told this story now were in phone calls, so we don't know what she said exactly. We only have the memories of the mother and of this friend MP to rely on to know what exactly went on in those 2 phone calls. But these texts that she sent to her boyfriend are, we can actually read these texts, and she says that the frat boys threw beer on her and tried to ignite that. She also explicitly states the location of the incident as State Street. These 2 details about the location and the liquid being beer are weirdly specific. If this is a made-up story, this is one of those things that sticks out to me as very strange behaviour. I'm sure I don't have to tell most viewers that beer is not flammable, and that I can only imagine that the only reason she would think it was beer is if she really did smell the liquid and it was sort of alcohol based and she could smell the alcohol on it, and that reminded her of beer, making her think that it was beer. This is the only detail that really changes in her story. When she starts saying that it was lighter fluid after visiting the hospital, and the hospital apparently telling her that it was lighter fluid, not beer. After texting her boyfriend, she Googled GHC Nurse Connect, which I'd never heard of before, but apparently is some sort of service where you can get in touch with a nurse and talk about various maladies or injuries or whatever. She tells her boyfriend that she's going to the emergency room after getting that advice from the nurse, and he offers to meet her there. These texts that go back and forth from AB to her boyfriend are important because they establish that the boyfriend had no idea about the attack or about her injuries when at the time of her leaving his residence for this journey. So when she says that she was injured at some point on this car journey that she took that evening, it seems like she's telling the truth, unless this entire text history was fabricated on the fly in order to support this lie that she was telling, which seems like very odd behaviour. So when those commenters that I mentioned earlier hypothesised that she might have been involved in the riots, or that she was burned by arson, that she was up to no good, that seems not to be supported by the GPS and the text evidence. If she really wasn't injured when she got into the car to start that car journey, then we know that she wasn't anywhere near the riots. She was in the correct city that the protests were taking place in, but she didn't go near any of the violence that was occurring that night. Her arrival at the hospital was captured on surveillance footage. We can't see the injuries on her face because the resolution just simply isn't good enough, but we can see that the clothes she's wearing, the grey shirt that we see her wearing with the white design on the front, was given to the police later for forensic analysis and found to have traces of accelerant on it. This is the only physical evidence that supports AB's description of events. The car and the rest of her outfit were not found to be contaminated with accelerant. I'm using that word accelerant because that's what's used in the police report. As far as I can tell, this is the first time I'm hearing the word in this context, but accelerant just means something flammable that could be used to start a fire. But although the shirt that she is wearing in the hospital, that we can see in the CCTV footage, that was indeed found to be contaminated, she didn't hand that to the police until a few days after she'd reported the crime, which is plenty of time if she was lying to put some lighter fluid on the shirt if she wanted to. I'm not saying she did that, I'm just saying she could have done that. The most frustrating thing about reading the case report is that all of the medical information has been censored. So we can only guess what the hospital staff observed about AB's injuries and how they treated her skin. Without knowing what it says under all the black pen marks, we'll probably never know exactly how AB's skin was injured. It could have been lighter fluid or friction burn or freezer burn or chemical burn. We can only guess based on the photos, and I really am not qualified to do that. But let's talk about these photos, which many people referred to when speculating about the veracity of the story. The first thing I'll mention is that the mother's Facebook post makes it look like both sides of her face were burned, but actually only the left side was. That would be the side that was facing her window if she was in the driver's seat when she was attacked. I saw one person online claiming that it was deceitful to post the images in a way that exaggerated the extent of the injuries being on both sides rather than one side. But I think it's equally possible that AB used the selfie camera to take one of the photos, which may have been horizontally flipped. The same thing happens to me frequently when I'm using either my webcam or the front-facing camera on my phone, where the image will be flipped. And I've even posted some videos to this channel where I've accidentally flipped the footage, so I know how easy this is to do. And I think it's possible that the mother was such a boomer that she didn't realize, she had no way to flip the photo horizontally or to even notice that it was flipped, so she just attached them to the Facebook post without really thinking about what it would look like. Maybe it was intentional, but the Heinlein principle and all that, who knows. Personally, when looking at the photos, I tend to agree with the commenters who said it couldn't have been a chemical burn or a flammable liquid being lit on her face. If you think about the pattern that liquid would make when splashed across someone's face, if it was sprayed or if it was thrown from a cup, it would sort of drench the entire face and you'd see a much larger area. I also saw some people mention blistering and singeing of the hair or eyebrows, which is not something that stood out to me immediately, but does kind of make sense that if there were actually flames coming off her face, that there would be singed hair or no hair at all. There's a weird mark on her neck that I find difficult to sort of visualize how that could get there unless she was being sort of struck multiple times with something hot or something that took the skin off. The only way I can imagine that the marks on her face and the neck could all occur in a single strike would be a very large sort of flat surface with her head turned to one side, sort of a dramatic angle, and the face being hit at the same time as the neck. I'm sure there's going to be some people watching this video who know a lot more than me about these kinds of injuries. Anyway, leave your comments if you know anything about facial injuries and burns and things. I'd be interested to see what you think caused this. But getting back to that timeline that I went through and the car exchange that I mentioned with her brother, this phone call that AB made to her friend at 1:01 a.m. would suggest that the attack probably happened at the brother's residence shortly before or shortly after leaving. The friend described AB as being terrified in the call, like she was almost frantic, as if the attack had just taken place and she was still sort of high on that adrenaline from whatever had just happened. And that suggests to me, based on the GPS location data and the pedometer data, it seems that the attack happened at the brother's residence just before she called her friend. Which means I now have to tell you about this car exchange. AB went there in one car, she got into a different car and drove home. This is because AB and her brother were in some kind of dispute with the parents about whose car this was. AB and her brother both lived with their parents, and the family owned at least two cars. The ones that were mentioned in this case were the Hyundai Elantra, which is the one that AB was seen driving in all the surveillance footage. That was the one that was checked for lighter fluid, for flame damage and all that. And there's another car, which is the Honda, which the brother was using that day and which AB wanted to pick up from him. So they arranged this swap so that the brother would leave his car, the Honda, outside this residence that he was staying at, his girlfriend's house, and he would leave the key on top of the wheel so that she could come and pick it up and leave, and she could leave her car with the key on top of the wheel so that they would exchange cars without ever having to see each other. And that was an important part of the plan because they were not on good terms at that time, and they didn't want to have any interaction with each other. One of the reasons that they weren't getting along at the time involved these cars, and although they do go into detail about it in the interviews, I'm not going to go into it here, but if you have siblings that you've ever had to share anything with, I'm sure you can get an idea of what the kind of fight they were having. In addition to the conflict about the car, there was also something the brother mentioned in his interview about how AB was fond of rescuing animals and bringing them home to live with the whole family. And some of these animals included goats and pigs, which is the ones that he mentioned, but at another point in the case report they also mention, I think, ducklings and chickens. I have no idea what kind of house they were living in or what the circumstances were, if these animals were in the garden or in some kind of shed, I don't know. But from the brother's description, it sounds like these animals were wreaking havoc in the house and making a mess, and that he was sick of having to live there with all these animals. In 2020, you might remember, we had a pandemic, and a lot of people were stuck indoors with their families, with their roommates and whoever. You can imagine that it was a difficult time for this family who were all living together with all these animals. That wasn't in the report, that's just my speculation, but the brother did say in his interview that he found these animals to be bothersome, and that was one of the contributing factors to why he was not staying at the home that night. It's also worth mentioning that the brother had his lawyer present on his behalf during his police interview, which, if he thought he was a suspect, is actually a wise decision whether he was guilty or not. I'm not going to hold that against him. It's certainly quite sensible to have a lawyer present if you're talking to the police, especially if you think you might be suspected of something. But taking all of this circumstantial information about this family's circumstances and the location data, I have a hypothesis that AB was attacked by her brother that night. Or it's possible that she got into some kind of tussle with him and hurt herself accidentally. I really don't know, but it seems like this is a bit of a coincidence that she was injured so close to her brother's place, and also they were having this feud and he was quite upset with her to the point that he didn't even want to see her that night. I don't know how he ended up seeing her. He could have been waiting for her to arrive at the car, which seems kind of unlikely. There's no text message from her to him saying that she was on her way, so he would have had to wait out there for like hours. I can't make sense of exactly what might have happened, but it seems to me that her brother's residence is the most likely place for this incident, whatever it was, to take place. But there are some problems with that hypothesis. For one thing, there's the text message that AB sent to her mother. Remember that "Phi long in" that could have been a typo for "night love you"? It would be a bit strange for AB to text her mother "night love you" if she had just been in a serious altercation with her brother. She could also have been sending this text message just to buy her time, like she had just been attacked but she hadn't come up with her story for what had happened yet. It's possible. Even ignoring these texts to the mother, there's still only about 4 minutes between when AB arrived at the brother's residence and when she called her friend to tell her about being attacked, with this sort of frantic fear energy that suggests that whatever had happened had only just happened. It's technically enough time for a argument and a fight to take place, or whatever it was, but it's still very weird that they weren't planning to meet each other and that they just, I guess, happened to bump into each other outside this place. And it's also strange that AB came up with this fictional version of the attack almost instantaneously and called her friend to tell her about it. You can understand how she could come up with a lie out of necessity when she was being questioned about her injuries, but this call to her friend suggests that she's volunteering the information. She just came up with this idea for a lie and was like compelled to tell someone immediately, which is quite odd behavior for a normal person, but it's possible that AB could have some kind of compulsive lying or BPD. But I can't possibly diagnose anyone in this video. I'm just speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. Even with the slightly odd behavior and perhaps a coincidence taking place that's necessary for this narrative to make sense, it's still the only thing I can come up with that would make sense with the hard data that is in the case report. After combing through all of the details collected by the police in this 100-page case report, I think it's beyond the scope of this video, or even beyond the scope of my own personal curiosity, to analyze all of this information. I have to assume something, and for the purposes of coming to some conclusion, I think I'm going to have to assume that AB, if she is lying, is the only one lying, and if it was her brother that attacked her, that he would be lying as well, obviously. But I have to take the other reports on face value as much as possible, otherwise there's just way too many variables to consider. So assuming that the rest of AB's family and her friend are fairly reliable, at least to the extent that they are attempting to tell the truth, at least, this is the only narrative that makes sense, that something occurred at this car exchange. Whether the brother was involved or someone else, this seems like where it happened. If it really was her brother who attacked her, whether it was provoked or whatever else, that means that she wasn't attacked by 4 young white men, she was attacked by a young biracial man. To the extent that she's biracial, you'd expect her brother also to be biracial. And for whatever reason, she wanted to protect her brother from the consequences of this attack or this incident that occurred with them. Maybe it was an accident, I don't know. So she decided to blame it on 4 white men, thinking that this was the simplest way to explain the injuries that she was presented with at the hospital. Now, it's true that it wasn't AB who posted this story to Facebook. As you'll recall, it was her mother who posted it, and that's why the story got picked up by the news, presumably, is that it became viral on Facebook, and that's how it got picked up by local news, which is how it got picked up by national news. So AB wasn't necessarily seeking for this story to become news, to become the subject of so much attention, but that is what happened. And now her name is on the list of black victims of white hatred. No matter how unlikely or discredited her story is, even if there's no evidence, or even if there is evidence that she's lying about it, her name is still going to be only ever associated with this awful crime that she was a victim of. I've avoided using her name throughout this video because I don't want to encourage or condone or even facilitate any harassment towards her. I didn't make this video to make this girl famous. I don't know what happened that night. I can only speculate, and I don't know why she lied about it or the circumstances of any of this. If she really did lie to the police, then that is a crime that I think should be investigated, but I don't think that she should be prosecuted in the court of public opinion before we know exactly what she did. Aside from my own intellectual curiosity, I suppose I wanted to make this video just to remind everyone once again that people lie. Everyone lies. People of every race, every sex, age, religion, everyone lies, but only certain lies get reported and shared by the media, and the media is the biggest liar of all. whether it's the news media or social media, they don't care what is true. They only care about what they can make people believe is true. The stories that we see in the news and on social media are not a random cross-section of things that are happening in the world. It's curated both intentionally and unintentionally by a number of factors, but it's certainly not random. And I think if you were paying attention to the news in 2020 before the election, you should be able to see that there is a certain pattern to what stories get picked up. And you may have noticed that the stories of black people being victimized by white oppressors has dried up. We don't see them nearly as much anymore. After the election, who even cares? Maybe in 2024 we'll start seeing this cropping up again when it becomes useful. And with that, I thank you very much for watching. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but I'm so grateful for you giving me your patience for what is quite an odd video for me, and I hope you are as intrigued about this case as I was. And have a very good day, and I hope to see you again soon.